Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. Welcome to another edition of Know Your Units. Today we talk about the One Vision Terranite. So, this is probably going to be unequivocal proof that when it comes to polls, it's complete nonsense, and everything at the bottom has a tendency to do better than the stuff at the top. So, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so the Terranite has been expanded in One Vision. What a shocker! I know, who could have seen that coming? But, basically everything across the board is improved on these guys, and to that end, I want to say that honestly, you could probably rename these guys to the Technical Knight, and it would work out just fine. These guys are the most technical frontline attacker in the game, as far as I'm concerned, having options to potentially engage almost any target that there is effectively right from the get-go. So let's go ahead and get started here. So first and foremost, gear access. Being a knight, obviously they're going to have the standard suite of heavy armors. Now, on top of this, though, their weapon access has been expanded. From the swords that they use in the promo art and finally can use in-game, to their standard two-handers of both the staggering as well as the slowing varieties. You've got axes for both the RT delay and breach varieties, if you want to do your classic Fear Breach combo. Additionally, they have access to pikes and halberds. For those unfamiliar with the categories, pikes will give you 2 to 3 range, tend to have higher damages and whatnot, have a little bit of avoidance on there, whereas halberds are typically going to have higher damage bonuses with a more modest avoidance thing there, but will only be range 1 to 2. And yes, this does combine perfectly fine with their fear attack. Then we've got our stunning options over here in the form of our hammers. However, they don't have access to the religious hammers. Instead, they have the stun and knockback varieties. On top of this, we've got access to cudgels if you prefer to use them more for casting. Though I will say it's really more the mind bonus that you're looking for here, more so than any kind of intelligence bonus, seeing as their most offensive spell actually scales off of percentage. One interesting kind of out of left field option here, though, is the whip, which actually functions really well in their hands. Fear and False Strike is very handy in a lot of situations, because remember, in One Vision, whips can attack diagonally. This means that not only can they inflict fear at a diagonal, it also means that they're potentially able to shut down accuracy for units that are going and spamming finishers. This is definitely kind of the dark horse pick of their weapons, but remember that whips are a very technical weapon. Again, diagonal attacks, potentially 2 range away attacks here, but on top of that, remember that they've got really good finishers, things like their kind of a poison water beam and stuff like that. So for example, like with this guy with his finishers, he's rocking the Tidal Bore there, which is essentially a 4-tile beam of guaranteed poison, or a Constrictor, which will damage and shackle. And in this case, it scales off of TP, so if you're going for a damage scalar build, there's that option there. Okay. Now, that being said, they did end up actually getting some stuff taken away in the form of their ranged weapons, so they no longer have access to crossbows, but it's still perfectly fine. Now, it's worth mentioning, though, that very similar to the FFT Knight, when it comes to their options on armor, not only do they have access to heavy and medium armor, they actually have access to a lot of evasive cloaks as well. For example, things like the Phantom Cloak, which means that they can potentially run very, very high avoidance. So while usually they want to go for the heavy armor, sometimes you want to have a lighter weight option. Now, let's go ahead and go on to their skills. What's new here? Well, obviously they have all of their new weapon skills. They've got their old augments. Racial-wise, we're looking at Teratology, Herpetology, Draconology, Psychology, and Orology. They have access to both Parry and Deflect, as well as Overpower, which pairs very well with all of their heavy weapon options. 2 ranks of Rampart Aura for blocking stuff out of your way, and remember that with all of their heavy armor options, they will be a very effective frontline tank. Remember that when it comes to the frontline options in One Vision, the Knight is, like the standard Knight, is not your only frontliner, it's not your only wall. Basically, anybody in heavy armor can be your wall. The Knight is the guy that commands the wall. The Knight, or the Terra Knight, is the one that pushes the wall. The White Knight is the one that resets the wall. Okay? Anyway, so they've got access to their counter hits, their bashes, as well as clarity and efficacy if you're looking to spam those spells a bit more. Jump and Wade, as well as Steadfast to have some movement options, as well as Max TP for going and boosting those damage scaling finishers. 2 ranks of Tactician, as well as Reflect Magic. If you are running a lot of heavy armor, they will have a little bit of a deficit in their magic defense, so this could potentially be a good way to turn that around. There's standard Fearful Impact, which works the same way that it always did, except it's a TP cost of 40 this time around. So this will guarantee secondaries as well as guarantee fear on hit. Now, due to the cost of this move as well as Tactician, this oftentimes puts them in a prime position to essentially serve as an accuracy option. The thing with Terenites is that while a lot of their moves take a lot of time to charge up, so like let's say Fearful Impact, you're going to need a couple turns of TP, something like their magic spells may take a couple of turns of MP, etc. When it comes to all of these options, they're all using separate bars. So something like a Fearful Impact can effectively just be kept on hand for those moments that you want to go attack with a guaranteed hit, meaning that their armor slots can be dedicated to something that doesn't boost accuracy, potentially giving them a little bit more versatility in the kind of strength or defense departments there. Now, the next change that was really massive here came in the form of Shadowbreak. So Shadowbreak was originally unique to the Terenite in One Vision. This later got added to the Blade Knight as well, but this is the ability for them to essentially stab their weapon out of a rampart shadow. So if they see any shadow clones that are around, they can effectively detonate them for their standard weapons damage. This will also inflict a breach on nearby targets. So they effectively take a defensive structure and turn it into a weapon. And if you're wondering, yes, you can use your own phalanxes for this, meaning that, for example, one of the classic One Vision combos is throwing forward any other knight that has a phalanx, dropping one down a couple tiles away, bringing in the Terenite to drop a Shadowbreak behind an enemy unit, destroy that thing, potentially hit multiple units at once, breach their defenses, and then follow up with a fearful attack, finish off with a longbow. Like, these guys are basically there to push that front line, okay? Now, Lament of the Dead does what it always did, however, it's permanently locked in at 60%, and also will remove TP from affected targets. So also very good at delaying finishers from coming in. We've got Instill Shadow because they're all about that dark life, as well as Opportunist and Absorb MP. Now, personally, I prefer using Absorb MP over the MP generation slots, but you do you. Your standard selection of wards, because of course, and that's kind of where we're at on this Terenite. Now, as far as their use in-game, as far as their overall functionality, this will depend entirely on how you want to set things up. Again, they are a very technical unit. Their spells are very kind of wide in terms of what they can do, and a lot of their abilities are actually percentage-based. So that's why I went into this Zadoba fight over here, so that we can maybe show some of that off. So we're going to go ahead and retreat Denim over this way and bring in some of our Terenites as we go along here. So the thing with Terenites is, again, that they're not exactly the fastest thing in the world, that they're fairly clunky on account of all of that heavy armor and everything, and additionally they're not the most accurate thing either. But again, Fearful Impact basically bypasses that entirely. But when it comes to their spell access is pretty darn decent. So it's not going to be this guy, it's going to be this guy that has a bit more of it. So when it comes to their spells, we've got things like Decay for inflicting poison and weaken. We've got things like Drain Heart, which will always steal a percentage of a target's HP. This means that this guy can open up versus bosses exceptionally well. This is a fairly accurate to hit spell, and this means that if he ever needs to recover, he simply goes and takes a bite out of a dragon, takes a bite out of a boss, what have you. Anything with a high health bar becomes his healing source. Effectively, just taking health from nearby targets is very, very handy. Things like Palsy's Skein for stuns and staggers, things like slowing down targets, or a Wormhole, which lens in an area and again does 10% of their health, which again is very useful for shutting down high health units. Not to mention Mass Leaden is just very, very solid. But really, it's the weird functionality of Drain Heart, typically doing, I think it's like 25% of a target's health, that leads to it having inordinate amounts of value in a lot of fights, especially versus boss fights. Like, where many other characters would have to worry about bypassing defenses or, getting around this, that, or the other, in the Terenite's case, they can simply just run up and do a little bit of a health steal on them, and they've already opened up versus that guy exceptionally well. Any damage that they took getting there, taking that risky play to get to, let's say, a boss or something, suddenly is recovered. They also are putting that boss in a disadvantageous position. It's very, very convenient. As far as their weapon options are concerned, again, very versatile unit, and it's actually one of these units that you actually can get away with potentially swapping out their weapons every now and then. Like, I like using two Terenites that swap out their weapons based on the situation. So, like, right now, We happen to be in an area that has a lot of units around, so I'm going for spear and whip. I mean, this has kind of been their standard loadout up to this point. But for example, something like halberd is very good versus a lot of evasive targets. Fearful impact is guaranteed going to hit those evasive targets, especially if you combine in something like overpower. That's going to be really convenient. Essentially, potentially bypassing those parries and things like that. Their heavy weapons come with bonuses to overpower. So, just different stuff to potentially consider there. So, all right. So let's go ahead and talk about some of their weaknesses, though. Obviously, they're a little bit on the slow side. They're a bit on the clunky side, so they're not exactly going to charge ahead entirely by themselves. But with heavy armor, as you saw there, typically they're going to do a good job of kind of tanking hits that come their way. Courtesy of that health steal move, in a lot of cases, if you are looking for a positioning unit, like if you're running a rampart aura type of situation, they can constantly use their drain health to keep themselves topped off. Again, that's the nice thing about that percentage scaling. It means that whenever they're just kind of moving around the map, they can definitely find tank units to go and abuse. Because those tank units you're going to have a hard time opening up with versus anybody else. You potentially are going to have issues with your archers landing effective hits on them. Your melee guys may need to get close to land hits on them. But when it comes to something like the Terenius, they can simply abuse their high health bar and then come in with a fear, you know? Very, very useful stuff there. If there's defensive walls in your way, you can go ahead and self-destruct them right onto these guys. So you gotta love it. You gotta love it. And additionally, the weird ranges of their weapons allow them to have a very effective amount of coverage on where they want to hit. Like, I personally love spears and fearful impact because it allows one unit to potentially terrify multiple units with a guarantee. Which ends up pairing up really nicely with any kind of ranged attackers that you may have, meaning that you could potentially open up, just kind of open up a line with something like a halberd, just kind of charge right on through that thing, potentially use them to shut down offenses for, like, let's say a particular unit that's giving you trouble. Like, let's say, in this particular case, let's say this guy was a ranged unit that was giving us issues, right? And so let's say we wanted to make sure that he was out of the picture, but we didn't have the damage to finish him off. Simply put, we inflict a fear on him, and that's the end of that. Suddenly those ranged attacks are going to be doing a lot less. Again, fear is one of those debuffs that's exceptionally good. It always has been, but in their particular case, because they're able to inflict that on top of a weapon, they're kind of getting a double benefit from the thing. Because not only are they scaring the target, reducing their offense and defense, but they're additionally going to be providing a target for the AI to want to heal. So if there is a more healing-centric party or what have you, they are going to be in a position that they, you know, potentially are getting abused due to their lost health. So this might distract healing and shut down offense at the same time. Great multi-purpose functionality there. So either way, great unit. So they've got the area control if you want it. They've got the damage if you want it. They've got the debuffs if you want them. Basically, whatever you'd like, they probably have it on hand, and they've probably got a little bit extra to spare as well. They're not exactly going to have much range, though. That's another one of their limitations. They're definitely a close range unit, pretty much entirely, just like the regular knight. They are dedicated to close range completely. But really, whenever you're looking for a very reliable unit that can adapt, surprisingly, I would say the Terenius is one of the more adaptive units in this version of the game, just due to their ability to guarantee an attack. Like that fear debuff, their ability to guarantee that it's going to land, their ability to guarantee a very, very wide variety of weapons. It means that they've got a lot of control. They've got a lot of control over what and how they can hit. High health bars are not a problem for them. They're very consistent at opening up versus bosses. And yeah, they're pretty difficult to put down on account of their heavy armor options. Now, they are mostly limited to heavy weapons, which is definitely not ideal for them there, but if you want to go for something a bit more defensive, you do have things like your one-handed swords and shields. And funnily enough, they even have two-handed swords and shields, one of many classes that, well, not even many, one of the few classes that's actually able to make effective use of the Wukong sword, the monkey sword. Being essentially a one-handed, two-handed sword there. But either way, they've got a ton of variety in terms of their weapons. If you're looking for, again, the more defensive option, you're pretty much looking at one-handed swords, but if you are looking for offensive options with a crippling debuff, as well as overpower, that's usually what they want to go for. That fearful impact, you really want to get it through. Overpower is one of those skills that you usually want to have on them at times. But yeah, they're... Like, I guess you could say in many ways they're kind of built around overpower in that way. I personally don't tend to run it that often because usually I prefer my spamming backup plans. But either way, it's definitely there's an option. As far as I forget if they have access to heavy shields. I think they do. Do they actually? Let's double check that real quick. Do they have access to heavy shields? They okay. Apparently they have access to light. What shields do they get access to? Not the light shields. They do get the Flame and Void. They get the Gauntlet. Oh, right. They're looking at okay. So shield-wise, as far as being a bit more defensive and what have you, I forgot about this. They actually have an interesting quirk where they're actually limited to gauntlet-type items. So things like the Flame and Void, things like the Power Fist, essentially giving them a weird thing where they don't have a shield in the traditional sense, but they do have a shield in the kind of classic SNES sense, you know. So unusual, but a really cool combination. They're all the same. But as you can see here, as we continue on grinding through these frontliners here, every time that we end up getting close, we can, or rather, every time we get a turn, we can just drop more fear in this particular situation. So we can end up going and repeatedly halberding through these areas. And typically, as always, I prefer the buddy system. So normally what I would say is just maybe attack from 2 spears from both sides, take the rook approach, maybe go for some swords and poisons, maybe go and line up two poison beams from the whip guys, just kind of side to side, you know? There's a few ways that you can do that. But this right here is one of those situations where it's very handy to have a guaranteed hit. He's not necessarily that accurate in a normal sense, but if we take a look at his equipment, we see that he's basically built for evasion and tanking, while also having a ring for boosting his debuff odds. So he just goes over here, takes his nice happy guarantee, suddenly this guy's out of the way, courtesy of that fear on there. That whip became a far bigger threat to him. It's just good stuff, you know? Very handy stuff to have there. Let's go ahead and kind of nuke through this front line here. Try to get these tanks out of the way, but like they're really good units. They're really something that you should have on your team. Not necessarily as the exclusive unit that you keep around. Really, that wouldn't be anything that you should ever give that much value. But yeah, very strong unit. Let's see, a couple of other notes here. So, as far as the range limitation goes, I would say that unlike other versions of this thing, I guess to some extent you could say that this also carries through to Reborn. But as far as a unit holding the front line, they have enough offensive options to be able to be an effective frontline tank just by themselves. They don't necessarily need something like a Knight or White Knight or whatever else backing them up. Just so you know. So they don't necessarily have to have another tank for them. They can effectively do that job themselves if you would like to exclusively use them as your main frontline unit. And another combination to probably throw out there is going to be Terror Knights as well as Berserkers. Is kind of funny, to be completely honest, because usually they can just fear and then the Berserker comes in and takes advantage of that, and usually you see a bunch of things getting completely wrecked. So that's always fun. Let's see, what else? As far as skills go, we already pretty much discussed using their entire skill list already. I'm trying to think if there's anything else to necessarily cover. Usually you want to have some kind of disability ward on them. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the stuff that we've got here. So a stun ward is typically what I'm going to be running on a lot of my frontliners. It tends to be around pretty often. They're not exactly the most evasive things in the world in most cases. So you do want to deal with that stun, otherwise they will become a lot worse. Rampart Aura, I would say, is practically non-negotiable unless you're going for more of like a speed or whip type of build. Potentially somebody that might be flanking around a bit more. It causes so many disruptions, and with their ability to get into position and scare a bunch of units, that those disruptions are extremely useful. Weapon category wise, is there any particular reason to use one over another? It's just down to preference, because frankly every one of their weapon options is excellent. When it comes to stuff like swords, they're able to overcome a lot of their innate accuracy issues. When it comes to hammers, stun and fear is a great way to completely debilitate a unit. Stun and breach is a great setup for any kind of long range attacks. Like I prefer running a couple of longbows and sidearms off in the background, so something gets hit by fear, you just go and abuse the hell out of it. Something like Spears is a great technical option because, for example, Wind Scythe is going to drain half of a target's TP, meaning that you can essentially go and shut down a finisher, only to then go and put that into a Fearful Impact or a Lament of the Dead or something along those lines, meaning that it's got great turnaround potential depending on what's going on in your situation there. And again, we already mentioned the ability to abuse percentages for bigger health bars and whatnot. So, yeah, very, very beautiful unit in a technical sense. As far as whips go, Mass Poison is great for delaying healing. Like, if you run into any situations where, let's say, there's a unit that's... Let's say it's one of those situations where there's like 3 clerics on the enemy team, and you're not sure how to break through that. Charge up a finisher for your whatever it was. Apparently my brain just stopped working here today. But no, charge up your whip finisher, your first whip finisher, and just basically poison 4 units at once. And the sheer chaos of that situation is usually going to be enough to delay them enough to let you deal with something else. So just bear that in mind, that their potential for just kind of mass debuffing units is pretty darn near top-notch. Not everybody can guarantee things like they do. Remember that typically when it comes to debuff odds, usually you're seeing high percentages, but not guaranteed percentages. So having that guarantee is really potentially important. As far as Lament of the Dead, it's pretty good. Like, funnily enough, I would say for one vision, it's actually kind of similar to Reborn in that way, where Lament of the Dead is kind of second fiddle to Fearful Impact, but it's kind of useful to have both, you know? So that's kind of an up-in-the-air kind of thing, I guess I would say. Alright, let's see. Is there anything else to really cover on these guys? Give them movement boots. So... One thing that I found really useful for a lot of the main story was taking the grease boots that you get in Chapter 2 and putting them on a Terenius, and then just kind of having them chill out in the water. Like, give them a spear, give them a pike, have them chill out in the water, Fearful Impact across, like, you know, the Sluice map? The one where you're essentially running several hallways, and not everybody's going to have access to Wade. They're a knight variant. They don't have access to Wade. But I love that those boots actually come in on a Terenius. So if you put them on your own Terenius, you can effectively do Fearful Impact pikes or something from the water. They're completely safe. They're repeatedly going and stabbing through. Sure, could you achieve the same effect sitting on land and just stabbing through their lines directly? Absolutely. Would you maybe feel a bit cooler stabbing behind your own guy with a pike? Maybe. But still, it's just funny to me that this asshole is just kind of floating there on his little floaty shoes. It's like, no, I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. Anyway, so yeah, you do you. You do what's fun. But nothing really absolutely spam spreads guaranteed debuffs like these guys do. Alright, so that's about that. Y'all have yourselves a good one. Thank you for stopping by, and yeah, remember to love your Terenites today. They deserve it. They might be spooky, they might have a bit of an attitude, but you know what? They deserve love too. So, hug your Terenite today. Ignore the spikes. Have a good one. Bye.